And now it's time to move on to our first presentation. So next, Hampus Jakobsson will share his knowledge on how to be a good lead angel. So Hampus is an experienced early stage investor with over 80 investments worldwide. So let's give the online stage to Hampus Jakobsson.
But I was asked to talk to how to be a good lead angel, and I will go through a bit of my journey and how I went from entrepreneur to angel to now running a VC fund, and some of my experience about what I would say a kind of a good angel does and doesn't do, and I think I've experienced all sides of that. So first of all, I want to really talk a bit about survivor bias, which is this is a picture of a plane, a British plane coming back from the Second World War, and the British Army analyzed where the planes got hit to try to figure out how to strengthen the plane and make sure that they survived better when they were flying in over Germany's territory. And so every single dot here is when the planes that got back, where they were hit. And then the British military worked on strengthening these to make sure that these areas would be stronger and better. But as anybody who's thought a bit about this quickly realizes that the reason that there are certain areas that are not have any red dots is because of survivorship bias. Because if a plane was hit in any of those spots where you don't see a lot of red dots, that plane went down. So the problem with survivorship bias is that if we only analyze the planes that got back from flying over Germany, well, those were the planes that didn't die. And those planes, you should have looked the other way around, where were the planes hit that went down instead of where to strengthen the ones that got back. So all of the things I'm saying, I think it's super important to realize that early stage startup is a very kind of small data set, and any single company that has done an amazing ride could have died during that journey, or any single company that died could have become the next amazing company. So I think it's always important to just remember to not take one data point and extrapolate it, because then you get these like weird survivorship bias effects. So without further ado, then I'll go in to talk a bit about my story and as essentially why I think some experiences are relevant. So first of all, I have a master's degree in computer science, which just essentially colors the way I see the world. I'm a technical background, which means that I invest in a lot of technical companies and technical founders. But I essentially during my studies, I started building a company, and that scaled that company from 6 people to 180 people globally and got acquired for $150 million. And I think that, of course, was a very kind of educational experience, scaling and building a company that taught me quite a lot about company building and anything from negotiation to kind of hiring and everything else, of course. And then from that, in 2011, I really started angel investing for real. I had done a couple of tickets before that, but they were very different. And then I angel invested throughout a couple of years. But the thing is, I think it's very important is I met a lot of founders. Like I met an enormous amount of founders when I did this. So a lot more than I invested in. And I think I'm gonna get back to them. That's super important, vital. But one thing I actually did really stupidly, and I really hope to convey that learning to make sure that you don't do it, is I started writing 2 big checks too early before meeting enough of companies and teams. So I'm going to get back to that in my learnings, because I think that's a very common thing for people to do, is that when they have decided to be an angel investor or they've exited a company and now have money, they start doing investments and writing checks. And I think that it's important to kind of understand how to do that in the best way. And then in 2016, I founded a multifamily office fund called Nordic Makers that is in Finland and Sweden and Denmark, and do essentially pre-seed and seed stage investment. And then in 2017, I left them and joined Blueyard, which is a 120 million euro fund in Berlin. And then from that, I ended up leaving them now in end of 2019 to fundraise for the fund that I'm running now, which is called Pale Blue Dot. And Pale Blue Dot is a climate tech fund. So it's an early stage fund investing only in software companies that work with climate change. So not the typical ones that most people think about, the clean tech companies. But let me get into a bit of my investment data. And this is full transparency. I think it's always easier to just share data and not just share stories. Multiple stories don't really make data necessarily. But so I'm essentially my data comes from angel investing in 2011 to 2019. It's a bit more than 80 investments. They're in 15 countries. 85% of them are pre-seed. My average ticket size of all these investments are 34,000 euros in the first ticket. And I invested so far 2.6 million euro of my personal money, not for the funds I worked for, of course, because that's a whole other thing. And then of that, the 2.6 million now has a market value of 5.3 million. And of those, 8 of the investments I've done are worth absolutely 0. 40 of the investments I've done are worth 1. And 1 can really be anything. It can mean that they're completely worthless, or they're going to take off soon, or they're never going to be worth more than 1. 24 of them have done some kind of further round, and they're worth between 1 and 2 times the money. And then 9 of them are kind of the runaways that we're all looking for, which are the ones that are worth, for me, for more than 4 times the money. So far, I've realized or taken out, that is 0.7 million euro, and that is of the company money went in, that is a return of 2.24x, and that comes from 8 startups. And those 8, some of them, of course, naturally dead, and some of them, a handful of them did the high return, and then most of them, of course, were very, very low on the return scales. So I think that, if I remember correctly, I think 5 of them are like between 0.5 and 1.2 times the return, and then there are 2 or 3 that are substantial on the return side. So that is the investment data, and I want to share that because I think that it's important to people to realize what this looks like. And I'm like, later when we have Q&A, I'm hoping we can have a bit more discussion. If people are interested in this, then we can definitely talk about or chat about that. So on that, then going into a couple of cases. So I'll show you a couple of different companies, and you can show how this journey can look. So 2011, I met and started coaching this company called PopDev. Started coaching them and really, really liked the people starting it. And then later, when the people said that they want to start a company in 2011, they started a company called Settlebox. I was pretty reluctant to some of the things, but because I really liked them as a team, I invested 10,000 euros, which is a very small ticket for me. But I felt that I wanted to back them, and I felt that I wanted to be part of their journey, but I was a bit doubtful of things. They later went on, built this company, and didn't figure out product market fit in a good way, and went on and died. But 2 of the team members of that team, then in 2014, when Settlebox folded, they started a new company called Castle. And in Castle, I invested roughly 40,000 euros because I felt that the team had learned a lot. It wasn't the complete team from Settlebox, but it was 2 of the 4 founders. They've learned quite a lot. And I would say that I much more like the new idea. And then Castle went on and went to Y Combinator. Then they had a round from first round capital, then from Index. And this is from Crunchbase here, so I'm not going to give you any kind of more secret details that are sensitive. But I participated in the first seed round down there. As you see, the 9 investors invested 360,000, and then you see going up. And in that first round, there wasn't like a clear kind of lead investor that took the majority. I was the first investor coming in, and I essentially invited a lot of other people that I felt could add money and value, mostly value, to Castle for that small round they first did. So I acted as kind of a conduit to kind of get the round together, but I didn't do the final legal due diligence or anything, but it was a very collaborative aspect. So that's kind of them. And I think that if you look at some learnings, is that my stock there is worth 320,000 euros approximately, which is more than 8 times the value. And it's very clear that I think that what I probably should have done is that I probably should have put more money in the subsequent rounds. I didn't. And I think that it's, of course, very, very hard to figure out if you put more money in or if you're satisfied what you first did. But I think that if you look at this, it depends on different philosophies. Should you back your winners, or should you spread your money? And I think that in this case, maybe I should have backed them when they went further on. But of course, the valuation had gone up quite a lot. So that was one case, and I think that looking at them and looking at some of the data, so I had a long relationship. I didn't do any specific tech or market due diligence. It was very much that I knew them and I liked the idea they were doing. It was a very, very good international syndicate. The first syndicate was people from a lot of different geographies, and people had different mindsets. And the founders, what I really liked about them is the founders had an extremely global mindset. They did not consider customers in their little small geography to be irrelevant, but they were really thinking about who's the best customer globally and how do we scale that. And those 4 parameters were a very big thing for me. Going to the next case this is a complete different company to show a complete different journey. So a friend asked me for advice about a company called Linearity, and I invested in Linearity. I helped them to bring in an angel investor who's a good friend of mine who designed Mac OS for Steve Jobs. So he's very, very good at what Linearity does. And it took 6 months, and then Holtzbrink invested in them, and now it's 9 times the money. And so it's very clearly a very good up round there. And I think, as you see on the Crunchbase data, I invested in that first round for 700K and only invested 10K. So this was a very different round where I was clearly not the lead, but I was very much just participating around. But you see typically how these experiences can be so different. And I think that in this case, I think what was interesting was that I was trying to add value and help the company introduce them to like customers or advisors, and really worked as if I worked for the company for a bit, even if I wasn't the lead investor. And actually, that was the thing that got me into these extremely first oversubscribed round, because otherwise I would never have participated and had a chance to join if I hadn't helped the company. Then I think, and this, if you look at some of the data here, I had a very short relationship. I mean, I only know the guy for a couple of weeks before I had to decide. It was very much like the smart friend due diligence, where I introduced this previous head of design for Apple, who then essentially like looked at the company and said, "Hey, I really want to join you in this investment. I think it's amazing." So he was the one who kind of did a lot of the thumbs up on the hard facts. I knew the founder a bit, but not only for 4 weeks. It was a very good and international syndicate, and again, an extremely global founder mindset. It was clear that this is not about a certain country. This founder is in Germany, but I think majority of their customers are in Korea and the US. So then a completely different case is 2009. I met this friend of mine, which I knew from another company, which I think is a very strong entrepreneur, very good entrepreneur. I starting a company called Planito. He asked me if I could join and invest, and I invested 30,000 euros. And then later that year, they were raising a new round, and then in that I invested 50,000 euros. And then in 2010, Bonnier, the big publishing house, their venture arm, invested, and I didn't join that round. And then in 2011, Bonnier invested more, and then for some amazing, strange reason, I added 150,000 euros, and they had a lot of traction. But I think that as I wrote there, then I clearly shouldn't have if you see the company later died. And then in 2015, when the company was at the ropes and actually looking almost to die, then I added 20K to kind of give them slightly more time to try to figure things out. I, of course, was not only my 20K, that was the ones that did it. And in this company, I was in the board, I was super, super active. I was a rather large shareholder, and I was super, super active with the company. But this company went to dust, as you see here. And I think in this company, it was a long relationship. I knew them very, very well. I did quite a lot of the tech DD, actually, when I did the first investment and the second investment. It was a very local and small syndicate. It was a small group of investors that knew each other from before. The founder essentially more or less called a couple of friends of his that he knew really well, and everybody said they wanted to join. Bonnier was kind of also the same. And then the founder had a rather regional mindset. He was looking to develop and scale in one country. And even he had a lot of interest globally. I think that he clearly felt, and it was maybe right, that this is probably smartest to do with a country by country aspect. But I think what probably happened wrong there is that because he scaled really quickly in a country and stuck to that country, the issue that happened is that he was able to kind of hit a local maxima. He hit the small little hill instead of getting up to the Mount Everest. And of course, he couldn't have known that he was on the small hill because he was on top of a huge mountain, the tallest mountain in Denmark or something. And I think that, again, I think it's important here that survivorship bias, this could have worked. This could have been one of the biggest companies we know of today. We don't know, right? But I think it's clear for me to see these three different journeys and see how extremely different the experience were. So I wanted to share those, essentially to share three clear cases of how things can be so essentially to spark your minds for the Q&A before I go into kind of some of my clear learnings. So if you look at my learnings from doing this and going through a couple of bullets of where I think that I wish I would have taken note before, and I hope that I can help you on some of these things, is that I think that I see clear learning is joining a pre-seed if you want to be active. So the company is raising sub 500,000 euros. That is a great way to join if you want to be able to make your monies mean something for the founders, but also have the opportunity to learn a lot and be reactive. And if you don't want to be reactive, I would say you join at the seed round, because then usually there is a clear lead venture fund or something, and yeah, they might call you once or twice, the company, but not as much. So if you're after interactions with a company and learning, then you should probably join a pre-seed. And if you're just after a financial placement, then I think seed is probably better, depending on what you want. I think it's super, super important for all angels to invest in a very diverse geography and not just local. I think this is one of the main issues I see with other angels. I have invested in rather diverse geography, as you've seen, 18 different countries from Finland in east to California in west, Canada in the north, and Spain in the south. I think that I'm super, super happy I've done that, because that has allowed me to meet quite a lot of different teams. And of course, not only pick the best person in my small little city, but try to figure out who's the best company doing this kind of thing and what's the best approach. And kissing a lot of frogs. And if you want to kiss a lot of frogs, you have to meet a lot of frogs that are similar. You can't really compare every single thing one to one. And the next thing is trying to understand the company. And my favorite way of doing that is actually doing due diligence through customers. So if the company is at a stage where they have clarified what product they want to build, even if they don't have a product, what I usually do is I sit down with the company and I say, so who would the ideal customer be? And they say, this kind of company. Okay, I'm thinking, who do I know at those kind of companies? And then I do an introduction and say, I ask somebody I know who works at whatever. Let's say that they would say, typically IKEA would be an ideal customer. I'm just making something up. I'm not sure if IKEA would be the best for helping me. But then I would ask somebody I know at IKEA and saying, hey, can you you want to look at this company? I think it might be interesting. They're super, super early. So the founder's not looking to sell you anything, but I think it could be interesting for IKEA. And then they go on a call, and the founder is usually super, super grateful because they're grateful that I introduced them to a potential relevant customer that can help them figure out their idea, or even do a sale and kind of get product license revenue or whatever model they have. But on the other hand, what's good for me is I can then call my friend at IKEA and say, hey, what do you think about the company? And I think I am perfectly comfortable if my friend at the company at IKEA then would say, I think they're very early, but I think they're onto something interesting. What I don't like them to say is stuff like the founder is just complete bullshitting. They don't know what they're talking about. This is they have a super weird approach, or they were lying at the meeting. They were completely dishonest or anything. I think it's important what I'm saying is not that I will only invest if IKEA goes on to license their product, because I think that is way unrealistic. And a lot of times I think that I actually sometimes really enjoy hearing IKEA say that this company has a completely unrealistic approach. They don't understand how complicated it is, because sometimes I might agree to the founder and feeling I think IKEA has the wrong approach. So it's more like having somebody who potentially is a customer to actually tell me what they think of the market. And the good thing is that through that, you get a lot of DD on product maturity, on clarity of thought from the founders. You kind of get quite a lot of where they are in the process. And then I think that for me, I really look for driven founders with leadership skills who can explain what they think. A very common problem for me is that when I talk to the founders and I cannot, I can't really explain what they're thinking. They can't get me to understand the product maybe, or they can't make me understand the market or something. But worst of all, I don't even understand how their process works. So I'm fine if they say, we don't really know how the market looks like, or we don't really know how we're going to build this. That is sometimes okay. But worse is, of course, if they lie about that, or sometimes pretty bad if I feel like I don't even understand if they know how the market at all. So I think it's that is a super important thing for me, just listening to them and understanding where they are in their thinking. And for me, leadership skills are super important. And leadership, I don't mean necessarily the Army general leadership skills. I'm after people that can attract talent and get people to want to work for them and get people enthusiastic and focused and things like that. And I find that charisma being more and more important in this world than ever. I think that it used to be a world where technical skills was what you needed as a founder. And currently I feel that because it's rather easy to raise money, I think more and more it's important to be able to recruit really, really impressive talent and being able to raise money than necessarily to build the first product on your own. And I think that for me, it's really, really important to build an international and diverse syndicate. So I really look for my co-investors to find people who has a really good network of other people, so that they can find other recruitment, customer intros, references, due diligence, what have you, and really think about not just picking my 3 best buddies that live in my own city that are men of my own age, but really thinking, who do I know who's not like me, who could like this company? Or who is a specialist about this area wherever they live in the world, or who knows that market geography that they might go into, and really try to think about who I can add. And I usually introduce the companies I'm investing into sometimes 10, sometimes 20 other angels, to just make sure that we kind of pick and choose. And for me, it's also, of course, very useful to listen to what the other angels are saying and just hearing the experience throughout the fundraising. And then one thing I find super important is never to promise to invest until you slept on it and talk to people. And I don't think that you as an angel I don't think you should outsource your due diligence to other people completely and say to the company, oh, I'm only investing if Joanne is investing, or if Lisa is investing, or if Mark is investing, because then what good are you doing as a lead angel? But I think what I want to be is I want to have a situation where I talk to the founders and say, I think this is amazing. I think it's super cool. I really want to invest, but I want to be clear with you. I haven't decided, and I need to sleep on this, and I need to think about it. Because what can happen to you a lot of times is you end up saying you're going to invest to the founders in the moment because you're so enthusiastic, and then the founders kind of build their whole world on the fact that you're investing, and they tell a lot of other people. And now when you talk to them 2 weeks later, they say, oh, we thought you were going to invest, and now it's going to be super hard for you to pull out if you have thought about it more, and it's going to be a really bad relationship. And sometimes it's much better to be clear in saying, or often it's always much better to say, I haven't decided, and here are the things that are lacking, or I just need more time, but here's where I am, and never say I'm in if you're not 100% in it. And if you feel you're 100% in, sleep on it, and then tell them next time. Never to be the only investor. I think this is really what happened to me in Planeta, the company where I ended up wasting a lot of money, because I ended up really becoming the hostage. That company, if they were to raise their next rounds, the conversations were always, will Hampus, who is in the board, who's done a large check, who has a lot of ownership, will he join the next round? And in that case, I ended up more or less needing to put more money in to unlock the next round to happen, which of course made me just what's, as it's called, throw good money after bad. So never be the only investor. And then I think another thing is just realizing that you actually don't know almost anything better than the founders. I think that when you're working with really impressive and good people, you might have experienced other things in your life or build big companies or recruit a lot of people. But if I always feel like I'm the parent of teenagers. I think I've lived the life they had before, but they're teenagers. They probably know this new world way better than I do. So I try to be very humble about my learnings and never tell them, do this, don't do that, but say, I don't know, here's what I would do. Maybe the world has changed, but this is what I'm thinking, and not kind of don't be the army general and like point your arm at them and tell them what to do, because that's usually is really, really bad. Because first of all, you're not teaching them to think at all. Like they're executing your company and idea. And then secondly, if you have founders that you need to tell them what to do, they're probably not going to be successful scaling a big company. And then I think the last thing is really decide what role you want to play when you invest in this company. Do you want to be the person that helps them doing a lot of introductions to people, investors or customers? Do you want to be the person that is coaching them, that is sitting down with them and talking about how they feel, how to scale, how to think about stuff, and be the person they call in evenings when they're like worried about something? Or do you want to be completely passive? And I think it's rather important if you can try to decide where you want to be. You don't have to tell them, you don't have to tell other people, but just try for yourself to kind of take notes so that you don't bring on too many active engagements. And also that if you tell yourself that you want to be really active for some reason, then make sure that you are. So those are my main learnings. And before I kind of leave the floor for all the questions, I really want to say one thing that is a very, very big issue we have in Scandinavia and the Baltics, which is a lot of people who do angel investments, they really they take a lot of shareholding for their money. And this is what I usually recommend, is that when you do a pre-seed round, so a round which has 300 to 500,000 euro, then set the pre-money valuation to be 1.5 million or up, and make sure the founders are not diluted more than 20%, and do the round with convertible notes, because that is the easiest way to make sure that you have a lot of flexibility, you can have a bit more money, and if like you can help the company in the best way. And in the seed round, it's typically an equity round. You make sure that you have slightly more control, and then the round would be 800,000 to 2 million euros, and with a pre-money that is north of 4 million euros and a dilution of 15 to 25% depending on traction. And the reason I'm saying this is that one thing that happened to a lot of companies that I'm in, and even more so when I run venture funds, is we've met a lot of really amazing companies, and we come in and we meet the founders and look at the cap table of the company, and the founders might own 30% at the seed round. And if the founders own 30% of the company at the seed round, this company is completely dead, because there is no way they can go on and raise another A round and a B round and a C round and build a huge company. They can build a little nice company, but they can never do these astronomical exits, because they're going to be diluted 20 to 30% every time there is money. So we usually make sure that you're thinking about how can you get a small slice of a big pie instead of getting a big slice of a very small pie. Because if you get a big slice of a small pie, well, that's the size of the pie. This company is going to be worth 3 million euro, and you're going to have a very hard time getting that company sold or IPO'd, and you're going to have a very hard time getting your money out, even if you own 25%. So it's much better owning 3% of a company that grows really huge than owning 25% of a very small company. That's at least my opinion, and that's a very big problem we have both in the Baltics and Scandinavia, with early stage investors taking way too high shareholding. So that was essentially where I want to talk about, and now leaving the floor open for questions and thoughts. And you can just write anything on the chat. I'm super happy to ask anything. And I see some of the questions that's popped in, so I can start addressing those that are in.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Hampus. Thank you very much for sharing all your knowledge with us. We have here 2 questions. I can maybe repeat these, and then you can answer. So how do you stay connected as an angel investor to the companies that you have invested around the world?
Yeah, I would say that's actually rather easy because when I ask all the companies that I invest in, I first of all I'll always ask them to kind of do a monthly update for all the investors they're in, both myself and everyone else. And I actually have a template that is on my blog where I published it and said this is a good template. I think it's really good for you. It's going to help you to make sure that your investors are aligned with you and know what's going on, which is good if you have bad times and need more money. But it's also really good if you have good times and need to raise more money. It's really good that your investors kind of root for you and kind of sell you to other investors, so to say. So that's one thing. And then what I do is I actually more or less check in with them. I have kind of a schedule calls, even if it's like in a month or in 2 months or whatever it is. I really make sure that I always have a call scheduled with them. And I think those are like two of the main things, or actually there are three things I would say. First, get them to write a monthly update, schedule check-ins with them. And then the third thing, I add them on some kind of chat forum, WhatsApp or Signal or Facebook Messenger or whatever I want, to really take down the formality of the communication. So typically what I do is like if I suddenly I see in a whatever Financial Times has an article in front of me and I actually realize this is about the company that I invested in and it's super cool. I take a picture and I post it to them on WhatsApp and say, wow, this is amazing, so cool, you're in Financial Times, and like, wow, how are things going? And of course then they reply and then we chat a bit, and then I say, oh, is there anything I can do to help you? And they're saying, oh, by the way, we're having this little issue, can we jump on a call? And then I say, oh, let's schedule the call, and then I send them a calendar link where they can find a time, or I send them a couple of time suggestions, and then we have a call in 1 week or tomorrow or whatever it is, and it's up again. And I think that's what I try to do. And I actually more or less have a long spreadsheet, which is much more like a CRM for me, where I look in when did I last touch with the base with the company, what's going on, and just try to remember what's going on with them so that when I check in with them, I kind of know what's on their mind a bit to be able to be most relevant. Um, so that I would say number one there. Should I just go through? I can see the questions here if you want. I can just take the next question on the row here.
Okay, if you want, just repeat the question
So
then so that
yeah,
everybody
so the next question,
understands.
exactly. So the next question is, how do you decide the ticket size for subsequent investments? For example, we're investing 150,000. That is a great question. So I think that what I usually try to do nowadays is now I started the fund, so now I'm not angel investing anymore. But what I usually used to do is I usually say that I do the first investment of roughly 25,000 euros, and I try to do that all the time. And I try to do that only at pre-seed. I try to join very structured in pre-seed investments, joining with 25,000 euros. And sometimes I do it slightly more, but not much more. And if I get more excited, I try to invite more people I think are interesting instead of going up and doing 100,000 euros. But then what I do is I usually try to allocate and say that I'm going to do 25 or 50,000 if the company reaches certain things. So I usually try to be thinking, if I feel that this is happening, then I'm going to add 25 or 50 or something, and really sort of hold myself accountable to that. Because one of the things with good founders is they're very charismatic, and what made me invest this 150,000 euro ticket was the fact that the founder is and it was very charismatic, and they were in a dire situation, and I really felt that I needed to save the company, and he's very good at getting people enthusiastic. And I think that if I would written down previously that I'm going to do 25 to 50K if they would have 10,000 users or something, then even if I don't have to follow exactly that, then I can look at this and say, they don't even have close to that. Why on earth would I invest that kind of number now? Just to try to kind of work with both my kind of cool mind and hot mind, so to say. But I think that one of the things is to figure out I think a really important aspect that I didn't mention here, of course, is that my investment philosophy has been to invest in more than 50 companies. And the reason to that is that if you invest in more than 50 companies, you have a much higher probability to hit an extraordinary good company. Whereas if you invest in 10 companies, the probability of you hitting a really good company is much lower. So my philosophy has been lots of small tickets, and then double down on the ones that I feel that like are raising really good round from really good people, and not actually just investing in few and lots of money in the few. But there's another philosophy, of course, is like if you feel like you want, for example, to build your local ecosystem and you really want to help local companies, then maybe you should invest 150,000 euros in 3 local companies and be on the board and be super active. But then you might not hit a unicorn, but you actually will build a local ecosystem and you will learn a lot yourself and have a lot of fun. So I have done a bit of a mixed view on these things, but I have gone into the strategy of more tickets and essentially like backing the ones that I find extraordinary instead of few tickets with a lot of ownership. Next question. Did I get it right and you made overall 2x in market value of your angel investments over a period of 8 years? Yes, that's 2.25 or something. The good thing with that is the reason I think it's better than that is because a lot of the investments markups are, of course, things that are raising money constantly. There's almost like a 2 or 3 year delay in this whole system. So when I looked at like my expected value, if the investments I did 2018 and 2019 will follow the same curve as the ones that did before, like I will have a pretty good markup. But I would say that that's the kind of that like what I'm looking at constantly, because the companies I invested in 2019, they have raised nothing else. And they're of course valued 1 times the money, but I expect at least half of them to raise more money. And then some of the companies that have raised a lot of money and are like very high valuation, the probability of them dying is rather low, lower. So I actually think that those are going to continue going upwards. But currently, the current portfolio, if I were to like sell the whole portfolio without any expected value or discounted cash flows or anything, it would be 2.25x. Lead investor being in the company's board, recommend or not? I would really say that if you're the lead investor and you have putting in slightly more money than most other investors, I would recommend that you are in the company's board. And if the company has a board. So I would say, first of all, it's like I don't recommend companies starting boards too early, but I would recommend when you actually do start a board, I think the lead investor should be in the board, because I think that a lot of people were going to ask you questions and you will need to be closer to the company if you're kind of taking more responsibility. As a new angel, which is the one advice you will give when investing outside of your home country via foreign digital syndicate, AngelList, or seed invest, etc.? I would say most geographies where you live, there's not a lot of tax issues. So I think that most of the times, a lot of angels worry quite a lot about what the tax implications are where they're investing. For me, it's been a lot less issues. But if you live in a geography that has a very specific tax view of the rest of the world, then you should probably look into that. But if you're, for example, in Europe investing within the EU, or in the EU investing in the EU, usually it's quite easy. But it's one of the things that you might want to check on. But otherwise, the biggest thing is making sure that you find local investors. There's one thing I always really avoid is if I meet an amazing San Francisco company and I seem to be the only person on the planet who gets this company, I always ask myself, aren't there other investors in San Francisco? Am I picking this company because no one else is investing? Whereas if I find it in a country where there are few angel investors, I kind of feel like, okay, maybe there are so few local angel investors that there's not a big negative signal. But I really that's the thing I'm thinking a lot about on the practical side. But on it sounds the question you're asking is more on the legality side. And I would say on that, I'm not worrying too much. I've never had any like adverse tax effects or anything, or sometimes you have to feel like horrible KYCs when you're investing in other countries, or that's something that you just have to do. Let's see. What statistic of your these are statistics only of my private investments. The question was the statistic only of your private investments or combined with the fund activities? I mean, the fund activities are completely different, of course, and I can't sadly even tell you them because you have to be an investor in the fund for me to be able to tell you data about the fund. And I think the fund investments are, of course, different because we as a fund, we invest, the lowest ticket we do is like 250,000 euros, and we do all the way up to 1.5 million euros. And one big difference is that in our world, like companies we invest in are a bit more mature. So there's a much lower risk of the companies just dying off. And the companies that do raise money, they usually either raise in like an enormous next round or they're dead within 18 months. So there are very few companies that end up raising a 1.2x increase. Either it's a 3x increase or it's like dead. Can you sell your shares or tickets at any time? Are they liquid? No, all my investments are they're in non-public companies. But what's happened a couple of times for me is that when the company is raising more money, they ask me and say, hey, like we have a new angel investing coming in, or a family office that want to like take the majority shareholding. Would you be okay to sell some of your stock? And I would say I never sell secondaries, which is what it's called, unless the fund that is investing is something that I actually truly disagree with should be the investor. So typically for me, if let's say I invest in a startup and now Index comes along, or Sequoia or Atomico, a fund that I really sort of feel they probably know what they're doing. If they want to invest in the startup and they say, do you want to sell your secondaries? I usually say, preferably not. And like if they say you really have to, then maybe I do, right? I maybe think about what's good for me and the company. But the thing is, what happened to me a couple of times is a family office that I feel like are actually not at all the right investor for the next round. They say, we want to invest in the company, and they have a view of a very high valuation. And I feel like, oh, holy God, like, why on earth are you investing in this company at that valuation? And then when that family office says, we would like to buy as much secondaries as possible, then I usually say, well, I completely disagree with what they're doing, but if you want to buy my stock, then you can buy my stock. And then, of course, because they're not public, like you have to decide on what valuation is a fair valuation. Usually what happens if there's a new round, then most people are okay with buying for and selling for 30% discount of the new round or something. So if there's a new round and I value the company at whatever, 10 million euros, you can usually sell your stock for 7 million euros or maybe 5 or whatever, but usually not at the same price as the round. How do you add value after the deal? Hiring, mentorship, next funding clients, some special skill like sales and marketing tech. Historically, I have been very specific on skills. I've been like, oh, I can help you with this particular sales and marketing skill, or I can know this tech skill, or I can help that. And I think that's what I did a lot in the beginning. And I was very good at it, and I could really help companies with those different problems. And then I sort of, after a while, I also started helping them with introducing them to a couple of clients and like customers and stuff like that. Or even like being late in their kind of the recruitment funnel, or like just keeping out an ear for good people. And over the years, I've moved much, much more into like just pure mentorship, really, and really just because of a bandwidth issue, really because I felt that I cannot like be that close to all these things. So what I do now is like I typically have just coaching sessions before I raise this fund. I just had coaching sessions with the different founders, and like I had them on WhatsApp so we can chat easily and talk about stuff. But if they said, oh, we need a person who knows a lot about machine learning, I sort of opened my LinkedIn and scrolled through WhatsApp and thought, who can help them? Oh, maybe this person can help them. And I think, hey, I invested in a company that's really good at this. Do you want to talk to them? They need some advice. And most good friends say, sure, happy to talk to them. And then I could introduce the founder to them. So the biggest thing I did for companies was actually connect them to other people, independently if that was on hiring, on funding, clients, or on special skills. That is like where I've now landed now. And the thing that's valuable for me is, of course, the network of people I end up connecting with constantly adds a huge value for the whole portfolio. So every new company I invested in, I increased my portfolio with other angel investors, other funds, but also other special skills. So like for every company that comes in and says, I guess you don't know anybody who knows about marketing on YouTube. I'm like, yeah, I do. I do. Another company I invested in had exactly that problem. So I'm happy to introduce you to one of the best people in the world on that. And not that I know anything about it. I just happen to know the company that worked with another company on that. So that is like really the skill I'm adding mostly. I think that I have taken all the questions that's on the chat right now.
Okay, great. Do we have any other questions? Maybe we can wait a bit if somebody.
Most people just want to go and have a coffee now. They're just like,
yeah. And if not, if all the questions weren't answered, you can write that question again, so then we know that we didn't answer it yet.
yeah, and the thing is,
maybe
if you want to reach me, I can say also that I'm reachable on Twitter very easily, and also like at the fund I'm running. Like you can always email me, and I'm happy to kind of answer if you have any specific thoughts or questions. Of course, if you feel you don't want to do them here on this forum.
Yeah. Well, there's one question that I like to ask from angel investors. So, what's the best advice that you've ever received from another angel investor?
The thing about that is like such a case by case. I think in almost every investment I've done, I think there's been some angel investor that made me think about something differently in that company or in that process. For me, I think it's like being an angel investor is very much like I think like it's kind of like running a marathon style. I think that you can't believe that one step you're taking is the step that makes you win this race. It's going to be a lot of small things. So anything from companies I pulled out, maybe a company I'm thinking about a company now where I really like the company and I was very interested in investing in them. I had a lot of conversations with them, and then I talked to another angel investor who were also thinking about them, and he said something that completely changed my mind about the company, where I was like, oh, I'm actually haven't even looked and thought about that, and that like made me pretty scared that I didn't really think about that as much, that I hadn't like seen that angle. Another thing I would say that wasn't actually another angel investor that wasn't advised, but one thing that really opened my eyes is that I think that I used to invest in companies and people that I really felt that got along with easily and understood after 30 seconds. And like, because I felt it was much easier if I meet somebody over coffee or over Zoom and I feel after 2 minutes, I feel like, oh, I get them. They're that kind of education, they're that kind of background, they're that kind of thing. And that made me a lot of comfortable about them, of course. And it was easier to kind of read what they were saying. But what I found after
Mm.
my first 10 investments is that I essentially figured out quickly is like, I invested in people like myself. I invested in rather extroverted people that are men that are +/5 my own age with a rather like similar education background that are solving our technical problems in the approach that I would like. And after roughly 10 investments, I realized I really should rethink this because I think that most people are trying to find the next Mark Zuckerberg, like a white man from a privileged university who is building like a kind of a kind of an obvious thing that it might not be good for the world short or long term. And I think what I end up doing after roughly 10 deals is that I end up thinking I should really think about more diverse founders. So I started trying to really actively find female CEOs and female founders. And I think that was really amazing because then like I met all of these companies that were doing things that at first I didn't know that much about. It's like period
Mm.
tracking apps. I was like, oh, I haven't thought about that much in about period tracking. But then of course, half of the humans population have periods. So of course, like,
Mm.
it's a pretty common thing. And that's like an amazing investment. I was one of the first investors in this amazing company and they grew so quickly. And it was essentially because most investors are men. So most investors invest in male companies. And I had a massive advantage of just essentially spending the time and trying to understand not only female founders for me, which of course was the thing I needed to learn more about, but also the thing understanding companies that address more female issues, for example, which is something that maybe I wouldn't know that much about. And the funny thing with that company is like I couldn't even test the app, of course, because like I mean I don't know. So I called a lot of friends and said, "Hey, could I ask you to test this period tracking app?" And
Mm.
like a lot of my female friends just laughed and said, "Sure, what is this about?" And I was like, "No, I'm looking at a company." So I think that was amazing, and I think that in Nordics, I think that I'm probably I don't know, but I guess I'm one of the angel investors who invested in like most kind of diversity on gender at least. And I think that sadly not on every aspect. I think that if you look at my portfolio, they are age-wise like not super spread, but like rather spread. Education, people are usually super high education. People of color, most of them are white. Religion, I think most of them are either non-religious or more of like the country's main religion. So I think that's a thing that I'm thinking about a lot. Like, how do I widen my aperture and find more people? Now I think a couple of questions came in here. So how many
Yeah,
rounds did you
we
lead
have.
with your private capital?
Mm.
I'm trying to think of what question means. So, I mean, I personally invested in something like I think it's like 88 deals or something. And I think the question, what you mean with leading, essentially. So I think I probably led 25 of them, where I was like the person who kind of designed the deal, I kind of sort of set up the most thing in motion, invited people. Maybe it's 30, but something like around that. But it's sort of very much. I think it's also tricky if depending on the amount of money you want to deploy. It's really tricky to kind of say that you're going to invest in a company and lead the round if you don't want to put in more than 100,000 euros. Can I briefly introduce Pale Blue Dot? So Pale Blue Dot is a climate tech venture fund. We invest in companies that work with reversing or reducing climate change impact. We invest pan-European. We invested in companies so far in Berlin, Stockholm, London, Amsterdam, San Francisco, and London. And essentially, the companies we invest in look very much like normal software companies. They can work with anything from software to synthetic biology. But the thing is that they're asset light. So they don't build factories. They don't only work with solar cells or energy systems. And I think that you can easily Google Payblue Ventures and you're going to find a bit about portfolio. It's an 80 million euro fund, or it's to be an 80 million euro fund. We did a first close of 53 million euro, and we're doing the second close of the fund in last week of January, when we're going to be completely an 80 million euro fund. Happy to tell you more about us, and happy to do co-investments with angels or invest in companies that you love that does a big impact on climate change. Which investor blogs or industry sites do you follow? What materials do you learn as from an investor? I would say the biggest thing for me is actually Twitter. I find on Twitter, like if you can super easily follow a lot of angel investors that talk a lot about how they think, and some of them even like publish their complete thinking. I think that is like some of the best. I think that just to be on Twitter, trying to find it, and you can literally just Google famous angel investors, and then you can just find them on Twitter and you start following them on Twitter, and some of them just write about their kids, but after a while you try to find more and more interesting things. What kind of investor would you not like to be? What is the worst thing an angel investor could do? For me, I think the most important thing is like, I mean, I'm in a privileged position of being able to angel invest in companies with my own money. And I think that one thing I think is super important is not to play God and play with the founders' lives, because it's so easy for one as an angel investor to kind of feel that I invested in their company, they must make sure to give me the money back or something. I think the important thing is these are their life. This is all they're spending their time on. This is probably not all your money, and this is probably not the most important thing you're doing in your life. If you lost that money, I mean, of course, it's super frustrating losing 50,000 euros, but the founder, they lose a lot more. So I think one of the most important things for me is being an investor who really understands that this is the founder's life. If they fail with this company, they might not ever be able to rise again. Even if they could, they might just feel that they failed. So whenever a company that I invested in is not getting traction, I'm super nice to the founders and really say, hey, this one didn't work out, right? I mean, do another one. I mean, fold this company. I mean, don't bang your head against the wall. And like, doesn't matter, right? Like, it's kind of like it's a lottery ticket. Sometimes you don't do it. So follow the company and do another one. I mean, I think that it's the best thing you could do now is like leave this thing and write a lot about what you learned, and like let's think about where you should have done differently. Because then that means that if they start a new company, you get to angel invest in that company. Or if a friend of theirs is doing a company, they will introduce you. So completely egoistically for you, it's the best thing to do. The worst thing you can do is shout at them and say you want your money back, because you won't get your money back. It's gone. And now you're just destroying their life, and you're never going to get another deal again. How would you recommend to us new angels to reach out to other geographic regions and angels? That's a good question. I'm thinking of how I would start it. I think one of the things I would start it is I think networks like this is really good. I think the important thing for you is just make sure that you kind of mingle with the people that are not just in your own sphere. So typically, I mean, one thing you could do, for example, is like what I ended up doing quite a lot is like I talked quite a lot with different venture funds. So I ended up talking to quite a lot of pre-seed and seed funds in different geographies, in my own geography and other geographies, and just said, hey, like I like this company, or like I think this is interesting, or send them companies. And what happens is that these VC funds end up trying to include you because they felt, oh, we got this interesting deal from this angel. We didn't end up investing in that company, but he or she was pretty smart. Like I had a brief 15-minute call. I liked them. Should we see if they can, like, if they were in like, if we should co-invest with them? And when you co-invest then with a seed stage fund or a pre-seed stage fund, they will then have to doing the others. And of course, the second you have done an investment which is international, then suddenly you're on a list with 12 other angels or 2 other angels. So what I typically do then is I like try to reply to their angels and say, hey, we'd just love to go on a quick Zoom call or a chat and just figure out who you are, and if we could figure other interesting deals, network a bit with them. And that's the way. The nice thing about angel investment is because each investment is between 10 and 15 investors, which means for every new investment you're going to do, you're going to get like broadening your network really quickly. And most of the people you maybe don't think that add much value or want to invest with again, but some of them it's going to be your friends for life. I met one of my best friends through an angel investment, which is really a funny way to kind of meet. So now I think I am at having done all of these again.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Hampus. It was great to have you here, and thank you so much for sharing all your experience with us.
No worries at all. Super happy to share.
Yeah. And also thank you for all the great questions. We have a very active audience today.